Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Madam Clerk, can you publish the verdict? Thank you.
In the case, State of South Carolina versus Craig Anthony Lewis, indictment numbers 2019 GS 15 00138, charges arson in the first degree. Indictment 2019 GS 15 00129, the charge is murder. As to the charge of arson first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant, Craig Anthony Lewis, not guilty. As to the charge of murder, we, the jury, find the defendant, Craig Anthony Lewis, not guilty. And this was signed by the foreperson on today's date, November 7, 2023.
Thank you. Would either party like the jury to be polled?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. Members of the jury, thank you very much for your service. Our entire judicial system could not function without people like you who are willing to give up your free time, your time from work and family to come in and make these difficult decisions. I thank you for your attention. I thank you for your hard work. I know it was a difficult decision for all of you to sort through all of that information, all that you heard, all that you looked at, and come up with a verdict. And I appreciate it. If any of you want to discuss any of this with me, you're welcome to give me a call at some point. Can be found in the Beaufort Clerk of Court, through the Beaufort Clerk of Court. You are welcome now to go discuss this case with anyone that you would like. You are not required to, however. If anyone begins to bother you or harass you or anything about your verdict, please contact me through the Colleton County Clerk of Court's office immediately, and we'll have it taken care of. Does anyone have any questions? All right, then. I would thank you all for your verdict. Any objection to releasing this jury?
No, Your Honor. None from the defense.
Thank you all very much.
Wow. Craig Lewis there standing for the jury that just acquitted him of murder.
Yeah, wow. There you see the defense team there, the judge in the foreground, or Kelly Craft standing for the jury as they walk out. We'll be checking in with her throughout the day. She was in the... Wow. I'm so glad we watched the close from the defense because it puts it in perspective.
And
how
helps
this
you to
happened.
Understand what they were working with and what they were faced with. And we'll see after we take a quick break whether or not Kelly Craft is able to get any interviews, see what the reaction is there on the ground after these jurors leave and after the attorneys leave that courtroom. But what a moment there for Craig Lewis. His life going to change now where he won't have to be under house arrest. He can move about the state, the
Not
country.
only he's not going to prison, ankle monitors coming off, and wow, that was crazy. More verdict coverage right after this.
As to the charge of arson first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant, Craig Anthony Lewis, not guilty. As to the charge of murder, we, the jury, find the defendant, Craig Anthony Lewis, not guilty.
Acquitted on all charges. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Julia Janae. We are following that news out of South Carolina where Craig Lewis was just acquitted by a jury of his peers. And we've been watching all of that unfold there. We're about to go back into the courtroom now. We are hearing about what they are going to do about the bond he was out on, $100,000 that he posted in order to be out and under electronic monitoring. Let's go in.
Defense would move to have the arrest warrants and all issues in reference to these indictments against this defendant expunged by the court.
Any objection from the state?
No, I believe there's a process for doing that.
No.
But, okay.
If a case is tried, then the defendant has an opportunity to have it done. If we wait till a process, there's a cost.
Granted, I'll be happy if you'll get the forms to me to take care of it.
Second, Your Honor, the defendant has been on ankle monitoring under a bond since February 19, 2019. Defendant moves to have that ankle monitoring.
He is released from his bond and the requirements immediately.
Third, Your Honor, there is a number, quite a bit of personal property that was seized pursuant to these warrants and indictments. Defense moves to have an order from this court requiring the Sheriff's Department to return those items to the defendant.
The items that I guess
They can have the sofa.
Right. The trailer, I'm assuming, is what
Yes,
you're talking about.
the trailer, even the pants, his all of his personal property that don't relate to any arson, like the lighter fluid cans. We don't want that, but the rest of his personal property, we believe he's entitled to.
Well, from what I saw, you're probably talking about the trailer, the 2 pairs of blue jeans, and what else? Was there anything?
There was a piece of a gun, or some guns, or something along those lines. But that's why I just said personal property, and we can work that out later. He wants his trailer, for sure. He can do without the pants, but he wants his trailer.
Who, Madam Solicitor, would be contacted to?
You can contact Steve Basil with the Sheriff's Office. He's in charge of evidence, and he can wait around and we can give Ms. Matthews the 2 pairs of jeans that were in evidence. We don't need them. So,
Your Honor,
have those foot jeans back.
I appreciate that from them. However, in the past, there's been some difficulty retrieving things. It takes, so unless we have an order from the court requiring that they return the trailer.
So Ms. Bright Matthews can submit an order with what she likes, and then she can take that to the Colleton County Sheriff's Office.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I did not mean to interrupt Ms. Swanson. An order from this court can be by Form 4 and direct, just return his personal property, and that's all.
And that's fine. If you'll prepare that order, I'll be happy to. I'll be here doing pleas for a while, so happy to do that. And if y'all run into difficulties next week, I'm easy to find, but I'm sure it'll all work out.
Thank you very much.
The trailer and the jeans. So, anything else then?
That's what I'm saying.
All right. I thank all counsel for conducting a very professional trial. I know it was difficult for everyone involved, and I thank you all for your professionalism.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Hey, Sheriff, can y'all get the evidence?
And there you have it, Craig Lewis. A different life for him ahead. All thanks really to his attorney who made those arguments to this jury about a case that she said just simply was not proven to beyond a reasonable doubt. Ted Rollins, of course, Court TV anchor, is still with us as we are continuing this verdict coverage. And Ted, just your reaction, because sometimes jurors believe that someone is completely innocent. They totally didn't do this, but they also sometimes just believe that the state didn't meet their burden, that they did not prove this case, even though there may be an inkling that he could have been responsible for his wife's death. Your thoughts as we watch Craig Lewis walk out of that courtroom a free man?
Yeah, it is extraordinary when you see a not guilty verdict come in, and it's a good question. I would, we have our team there. Maybe we'll be able to talk to some jurors, because I would love to know what their thought process was. Was it, to your point, hey, they didn't prove this case, he might have done it, or did they take everything that they were told on that outstanding closing argument to heart and say, I don't think he did it.
Yeah, Margie Matthews putting on a lengthy closing argument compared to what the state presented to this jury. That jury was only out for an hour and 50 minutes. We have a new clock I do want to reference that is on the screen now, 37 minutes that the Delphi, Indiana courtroom has been in deliberations in the case against Richard Allen. We'll, of course, give you updates once we learn anything out of that courtroom. But I want to bring in my guests for this hour just to react to this verdict in South Carolina. We have criminal defense attorney Marie Pereira and Circuit Deputy Solicitor April Sampson as well. Marie, you were on with us the last hour. We were saying how strong this defense was your reaction to this jury coming back in an hour and 50 minutes.
I'm so happy that I'm on today because I think I'm covering for someone I'm not really scheduled for on Thursdays, but I got my popcorn out. She did that. She said money over mama, and she said you're a BBL, and I don't mean Brazilian butt lift, befuddling body language. She put Leanne under the bus, and she convinced them that this was never about a crime committed. This was a predetermined issue, that he did it based on who she was, her friends at the police station. She did that for him, and that is an example of compelling litigation. I could watch this all over again. Matthews Bright, I want to be your friend. I requested you on Instagram. Please, me and you, we got this, all right?
Marie giving her approval for this defense. April, talk about this prosecution, because this has been going on. You heard the defense attorney say since 2019 he hasn't been in possession of some of his items, important items, his trailer, clothes. He's been under electronic monitoring. He was behind bars for a period of time before he posted that $100,000 bond. And now it seems this jury has said you didn't have evidence along the way to prove that he was guilty of these crimes.
And I think there's a difference, as you all keep saying, between somebody didn't do it and the state proving beyond a reasonable doubt, right? And so that burden for the state is really high and sometimes hard when you have a second. And in this case, Margie Bright did a good job, Matthews did a good job of showing there might have been a second person who we need to talk to or look at who's not necessarily being the most truthful. And that is always a problem for the state to have to deal with when you've got, this is a he said, she said type of situation. And those are always hard. They're never slam dunks when you've got that. And so I do think he's had to go through a lot, but that doesn't, as we've already said, mean he is innocent. It means that the jury decided there wasn't enough proof to meet the burden. And that's why we have this system, and that's why it's so great.
Yeah, speaking of this, she said that would be the daughter of this, of the victim in this case, the one who said that the defendant injured her mother the day before, and it's something that the jury rejected based on their acquittal. But let's take a listen back to the defense's closing. This again is Margie Bright Matthews telling this jury that the evidence doesn't point to her client.
Why are we here when we have this statement? And I want you to take this back and read it. 63-year-old female with history of diabetes mellitus, hyperlipidemia, hypertension, thyroid disease, presents to emergency department, complaining of burns, onset, once again, to refute what the state has said, just prior to arrival. It doesn't get any simpler than that. Patient states the patient trying to start a fire in the fireplace with a lighter fluid. Patient states, not husband, patient states the flame shot backwards and caught the patient and her clothes on fire.
So Ted Rollins, I actually want to ask you this question about the daughter, because she was sitting there inside of the courtroom in the gallery. I didn't notice her. I don't know if you did, in the gallery for the verdict. We'll have to check with Kelly to see if she was there, but this is no doubt a difficult day for her to hear this verdict.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Attorney Matthews did such a great job of sort of attacking the daughter's credibility on one hand, but then also blaming investigators. You know, you have this woman that comes in and says, "Oh, this has to be at the hands of my stepdad. This was murder," and there wasn't a check there, and they didn't seem to, and it was beautifully articulated by Attorney Matthews, to check up on all of these allegations. They went all in, and that, that demonstrative aid and the way that she delivers it, and she reads it all out and then she just looks at him and was like, what are we doing here? And it was compelling on every level. Whether he did it or not, he picked the right attorney.
And speaking of, because a lot of those things that you're pointing out, I'm remembering that these jurors couldn't take notes. We learned that from our legal correspondent, Kelly Craft, and I'm hearing that she is now live outside of that courthouse, Walterboro, South Carolina. Kelly, I saw you inside for this verdict, a bit jaw-dropping for us here in the studio. What did you see?
Well, good afternoon to you, Julia and Ted. Yes, so the jurors just returned the verdict moments ago, as you have been reporting here on Court TV. Not guilty, arson and murder. So Craig Lewis has been on trial here in Culleton County for murdering his wife, Terry. They were married for a number of years. So as that verdict was read, I was sitting inside that courtroom, and we did hear some people when the jurors said not guilty, you heard some sighs, and then eventually we did see Leanne. Leanne was the state's key witness. She is the daughter of Terry, and she eventually made her way out of the courtroom. She barely could walk. She had to have help walking. She was trembling. She was shaking. People were helping her walk out. Now, I know before the verdict, she had told me that she was going to talk with us, but then after the verdict was read, she appeared to be in no condition to come on camera and give any sort of statement. But of course, very disappointing verdict for her. On the flip side of that, we did get a chance to talk with the defendant in this case, Craig Lewis, who said he was very relieved, and we talked with his defense counsel, who said that he felt like jumping out of a window. He just was ecstatic and cannot wait to get on with his life. We did an interview with his defense counsel, and we're getting that teed up for you so our viewers get to hear what she had to say. But one of the things that she talked about in this entire case is that there was no direct evidence. Now, oftentimes there is no direct evidence. You have to base it on circumstantial evidence. But what she talked about in this case is there were no incidents of prior domestic violence that had been reported by the victim in this case. Also, the victim herself is the one that told the doctor and the nurse, per their testimony on the stand, that she herself is the one that accidentally started this fire, that she was over by her wood-burning stove that she had used for a very long time, and that it blew back on her. The fire blew back on her. So the defense counsel, used the victim's own words that she told to the doctor and the nurse who testified to those words in court. So that was a very big deal for defense counsel here. Another thing that defense counsel hammered on is the fact that this at first is a fire, and now we're here to murder. So why is my client charged with murder? Because at first Terry Lewis did not die. She eventually died. So what defense counsel was talking about are all of the injuries, the illnesses that the victim in this case had. She was in her 60s. There was a more than 20-year age difference between Terry Lewis and her husband. So she was in her 60s. They actually got married when Craig Lewis was in his 20s. So defense counsel really talked about that and how Terry Lewis had suffered from bipolar disease, how she suffered from tremors, shaking, depression, a slew of medical issues that defense counsel made clear to the jurors, making it appear that Craig Lewis had nothing to do with her eventually dying from these injuries that she caused herself by setting herself on fire. That was the big point made by defense counsel here. Also, one of the things defense counsel talked about, follow the money. Really talked about the state's key witness, Leanne, so the daughter of the victim, and how she cared more about money than her mama. That's one of the things that she left the jurors with. Now, the jurors did not get to take notes throughout this case, so they really had to rely on their memory, what they saw during court. I will tell you, from sitting inside the courtroom, defense counsel comes across as very likable with her demeanor. I know some people were saying that she came at some of the witnesses a little bit hard, but I was watching the jurors and their reaction when the senator was going against them. She's also she's a politician here in town, in the state. So they were listening very closely to what she was saying to the witnesses, and you could tell they were agreeing with her that there seemed to be, according to defense counsel, a sloppy investigation here. Nothing really written down. You could tell the jurors were really picking up on what she was putting out there.
Kelly Craft, we love getting your insight from inside of that courtroom. We do have to get to a break, but that interview that you did with the defense attorney, we're getting that ready for our viewers. Stay with us. You're watching Court TV, your front row seat to justice. Celebrity trials are like no other. you not only have the drama of what's happening inside the courtroom, there's the drama of who these people are. Paparazzi everywhere, people just hoping to get a glimpse. It's something that we haven't seen anything quite like. A strong showing for the case against Robert Kelly. There's this balance between the pizzazz of celebrity and the seriousness of a trial in a courtroom, and Court TV gets to bring you all of it.
As to the charge of arson first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant, Craig Anthony Lewis, not guilty. As to the charge of murder, we, the jury, find the defendant, Craig Anthony Lewis, not guilty.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. We are following that verdict coverage out of South Carolina. Meanwhile, there's a verdict that could be pending in the Indiana Delphi case. The case against Richard Allen, you see the clock there, 52 minutes. They've had that case. We will bring you any updates out of that courtroom if there are any. But for now, we're going live to South Carolina, Walterboro to be exact, where we find Court TV legal correspondent Kelly Craft, who was there in the courtroom for that acquittal of Craig Lewis in the burned alive murder trial. Kelly, you've gotten reaction from those outside of this courthouse following that news.
Hi there, Julia. Yes, we did. So the jury, they found Craig Lewis not guilty of murdering his wife and also not guilty of arson. So this was a long time in the making, this trial. The family of Terry Lewis had waited about 6 years for this trial. Finally started this week, and it went quick. The state put forth a lot of evidence in this case, but in the end, jurors ultimately acquitted the defendant in this case. We did get a chance to catch up with the defendant's attorney right afterwards. This is State Senator Margie Matthews. She was representing him. She had this to say right after the verdict. First of all, your reaction to the verdict.
Of course, we're happy that it's finally over. There have been a lot of allegations that were made along the way. I'm glad the verdict is final and the jury has spoken.
What do you think made them find Craig Lewis not guilty?
They didn't have any evidence, and they knew they didn't have any evidence. It was on conjecture and speculation and possibilities. This is America. You have to prove someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. They didn't put their case forward. They didn't have a case to put forward. And their one witness, she was so compromised with other things going on, there was no way she could have been telling the truth.
What was Craig's reaction?
He said he could have jumped out of the window to get home. He's ready to get home, get the ankle monitoring. They took his property. They didn't even use the property as a part of the case. He's been on house arrest technically with the ankle monitoring, paying for it for 5 years. And he didn't even get to see his wife before she died.
One of the things that you talked about were the doors on the wood-burning stove. You were saying that it wasn't tested. They talked about this black debris, but when was it on there? She had this stove for over 20 years.
Exactly. Well, first they showed the jury a picture of a placard with the door closed. They closed the door. But they forgot the first picture that they showed was the one that I blew up that showed that the door was open with a piece of wood that she was trying to light. And then there's ash and cigarette butt on the outside. And so I don't know why they were just trying to fabricate a case.
You also had, you talked about this, the victim's own words to the medical professionals. She said she did it.
She said it was an accident and that she was using lighter fluid to light the fire, and the fire came back on her and burned her clothes. But for me asking that information from the hospital, why didn't the sheriff's department do that? I gave them that information at the bond hearing. So this should not have continued on. I don't know why it continued on. They got no other evidence. They did not do anything else to move this case along. All they did was complain that for some reason, because I'm in the Senate, that I failed to move the case along. It was them the entire time. They didn't give her DNA swabs from the pathologist until 2022, 3 years after her death. So I asked, who's the one that failed to move the case along? Who failed to investigate? This is a citizen. This is a man who lost his wife of 25 years. We as citizens deserve more. This is America.
Anything else you want to tell us?
Nothing. Thank you.
So what did the state talk about? Leanne, the victim's daughter, saying that Leanne witnessed a domestic violence incident between her mother and Craig. And then when her mother ended up being burned, and Leanne, who you're looking at right there, eventually made her way to the hospital, she herself is the one that eventually told a nurse about this domestic violence incident that she claims that she witnessed the night before. And then that's when things started to unravel for Craig Lewis. That's when police started to take a look at Craig Lewis and wonder, did he have something to do with this? The state was saying that there is circumstantial evidence in this case that Craig Lewis manipulated the scene. They talked about how he removed a burnt couch. He got rid of her burnt clothing. Either he had set her on fire, according to the state, or he set the couch on fire where she always would sit. But in the end, the jurors did not believe what the state had to say. They did not find that the state proved Craig Lewis guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And ultimately, they acquitted Craig Lewis. Leanne, during the verdict reading, and in the end, she walked out very hard time in the courtroom, barely could walk out of that courtroom. I did get a chance to briefly talk with some jurors. They did not want to go on camera. They did say it was tough inside that deliberation room, but in the end, they just felt that there was not enough evidence to find him guilty.
Oh, that's interesting to hear some feedback from those jurors, Kelly. An hour and 50 minutes. Can you set the stage there in Walterboro as to how quickly things moved? Were people surprised when they saw that the clock had stopped? Sometimes people scatter. They think it's going to be a long amount of time. It's still just 2 o'clock there in South Carolina. But what was it like hearing an hour and 50 minutes? Pause the clock.
Some people were still on a little bit of a lunch break, and then people start receiving their texts. And then you hear people, even in a little sandwich shop, that were saying, oh no, there's a verdict. People need to get back. And people were telling people, well, there's a shortcut over here. You can go through this alley and get back. But people felt that, from people we have talked with in this community, they felt that there was not enough evidence that Craig Lewis actually did this. And they came to that conclusion because of the victim's own words. So when they've been following this case and looking at it, they saw that the defense counsel was talking about that during this case. The victim's own words, when she went to medical professionals, she is the one that said she did it. The state wanted to talk about the bloody footprint of Terry Lewis that was found at the scene inside the house, but when she did get to the hospital, there was no sign of that. The doctors, the medical professionals, stated in their report that Terry Lewis was cooperative, that she told them, again, that she is the one that did this, and Craig Lewis was there. The state also tried to make a big deal out of the fact that Craig Lewis did not call 911, but rather he took her to the hospital. Well, the state senator, defense counsel, said, well, of course, if your spouse is on fire, you're going to take that person to the hospital yourself and not wait the few minutes for 911 for an ambulance to get there, because he did not live that far from the hospital. So interesting scene here always. This is a small town. I'm sure, Julia, you have been out here because we're over here in Culleton County where Alec Murdaugh was found guilty. So media professionals and people all across the country are very familiar with this very small town. It's a very small courthouse. So you basically walk inside and walk upstairs and there's your courtroom. And it's a pretty large courtroom. And when the verdict was read, it was really packed. A lot of people that were inside there waiting to hear the verdict. And then, of course, when the verdict came back is not guilty. There were a lot of sides inside that courtroom.
I'll bet. What a case this has been. Kelly Craft, thank you so much for all of that reporting for this case, this post-verdict coverage, for that interview. I want to let you get back to that coverage and what's going on there, but we are going to bring in our guests who are standing by. Circuit Deputy Solicitor April Sampson is with us, as well as criminal defense attorney Marie Pereira. And Marie, I want to ask you about that interview that Kelly did with State Senator Margie Matthews. The optics of that, when you have someone who no doubt the people in that area recognize, she leaned into knowing what it's like to be in Walterboro. She mentioned that during her closing argument. What is that like for the jury? The optics of seeing that and probably believing that someone who's in such a respected position wouldn't likely represent someone who they don't believe in their innocence.
Well, obviously, her stature and her respect in the community helped to convince the jurors. But at the end of the day, what makes me really angry is, being a former prosecutor myself and a criminal defense attorney, I understand that prosecutors have a role to investigate before they go around charging people. Because, like April says, we're assuming, because of the verdict, that he is not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. We're not assuming that he's innocent. See, that's where I have a problem, because at the end of the day, he will never get that time back. He didn't get to go to his wife's funeral. Okay, the juries, they did the right thing, but he can't get that time back. And the prosecutor should have had a responsibility to investigate before they charge him. Investigate the daughter's motive, money over mom. Investigate the unnatural relationship she had with the investigators, okay? Investigate the bias that existed clearly. And the medical records were there for everybody to look at. The woman said, "I accidentally burned myself." I understand sometimes victims of domestic violence lie about how they got hurt, but can the prosecutor follow up before they charge somebody like they did to him, ruin his entire life? He will never get that time back, and the society is always gonna look at him, like April said, not that he's innocent, but because they accuse him of murdering his wife through arson, the worst way, and they didn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, so he's out now. So there's always gonna be a cloud. And then when they wanted to expunge, the DA had the nerve to be trying to fight the expunge to stretch it out. That's just not right.
I want to ask you, April, real quick before we have to go to break, a malicious prosecution claim. Do you see evidence supporting that here in this case?
Well, no, because in South Carolina, the prosecutors don't make the charges. So the charges are made prior to the prosecutor even getting the case. Now, can a prosecutor choose to change the charges, upgrade them, downgrade them? Yes. But we don't investigate and then make the charges. The charges are made and then we deal with what is made. So it sounds like, from what I watched and what I heard, some of the evidence that they had, the physical evidence, didn't necessarily match what was being said by the defendant and or the victim in this case. And so, yes, they had to do some investigation once it's happened, but it's not as clear cut as saying, well, they just kept going after the wrong guy, or he, is clearly innocent. They clearly had some factors that didn't match what he was saying happened or what the victim said happened. And they had a witness who was saying totally different. So.